So I'm joined now by Sarit Zehavi from Western Galilee. Great to have you, Sarit. Boker Tov.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You are the founder and director of Alma. So what is Alma?
First, I named Alma after my little girl, after my daughter.
Yeah.
The mission of Alma is to provide knowledge and analysis about Israel's security challenges on the northern border. We are based about 11 kilometers from the Lebanese border, and all of us live in the region, and we come from various backgrounds. Not all of us are Jewish, not all of us served in the army, and not all of us hold the same political views, and this actually creates a different point of view, an authentic but yet professional one. And we also give a lot of attention to the fact that it's important not only to write about what is happening in Syria, Lebanon, in Iranian involvement, Hezbollah, ISIS, but mainly to speak about it. And that's why until COVID, we've met about 50 groups each month that came to the region.
Yeah.
From various audiences, by the way, from students to congressmen and opinion makers and policymakers.
Yeah.
And since COVID, we are putting a lot of efforts in the research, and we meet the people in Zoom.
Yeah. So what will you say is the situation now at the border with Lebanon? Is it more tense than it was 2 or 3 years ago, or is it stable, or?
It is stable and more tense than it was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It is more tense because there are more what we call open taps between Israel and Hezbollah and Israel and Iran. And Iran is much more based on our borders with its proxies, either Hezbollah or other militias in Syria. We get more provocations on the border. I'm not saying terror attacks, I'm saying provocations. More threats, including Alma Center that was threatened by Hezbollah, Alma Center itself.
Okay.
But it's stable in a sense that I took my family to the border last week. And my friends in Yom Ha'atzmaut, in the Independent Day, we traveled along the border, and there are some beautiful sites there. So, and whenever it's not stable, so we avoid going there. But for now, it's okay.
Yeah. So Israelis can visit parks and do hiking all towards the border fence. Yes,
and Israelis live in many communities that are located at the fence, very close.
Yeah.
And there are beautiful sites there. Yes, we can hike, we can take a view towards Lebanon, to take a look, to see what's going on, to see the tunnels, the border crossing tunnels of Hezbollah on the border. Tons of interesting places there.
Yeah. But what are your, so I guess you follow the open sources development in Lebanon, and and you obviously read Arabic, I guess, and I'm curious about the development in Lebanon, because what I gather is that the economy is like totally crashed, and the situation for the average Lebanese is probably much worse than the average Palestinian. Would you agree?
Right.
Yeah. You would agree with that assessment?
Yes. It depends which Lebanese and which Palestinian.
Yeah.
But in general, the situation in Lebanon, I think there is less hope. And I'm saying that very, very sadly, because as I've told you, my regions are from these areas, Damascus, Beirut. So it's very sad to say so, but my feeling is that the Christians and the Sunnis, and mainly the Christians, are actually leaving Lebanon. They lost hope to gain change, and those who stay became they don't have the capability to create a true change. And the stronger player in Lebanon today is Hezbollah.
Yep.
And when I'm saying the stronger player, I don't speak only about military level. I mainly speak about civilian capabilities and the capability to provide food and medicines and the everyday necessities of the population. And that's why Hezbollah in a gradual process is replacing the government. And we've seen this everywhere. And I think that's why there is very little hope, because eventually what may happen, and again, I hope it will not happen, but this is where it looks like it is going to, is that Hezbollah will completely take over by these civilian systems and civilian issues in a way that there will be no hope to those who are opponents to Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Yeah. After a short break, we will talk more with Sarit about Syria and also her family background from that country. So stay tuned.
Vi håper du vil abonnere på Med Israel for fred på YouTube. Her finner du et stort antall foredrag av internasjonale eksperter, aktuelle direktesendinger og korte videoklipp. Husk å like, abonnere og motta varsler. MIFs YouTube-kanal vil gi deg noe alle trenger, mer forståelse for Israel.
We are back with Sarit Zehavi from Alma Center in Israel. Great that you're joining us, Sarit. When you also work with Syria and study the development there, and you have a personal connection also to Syria that you maybe will tell us.
Yeah, my father was born in Damascus. Actually, my family name Zehavi is kind of a translation from the Zehavi. Zehav is gold in Hebrew, and my grandfather was a jeweler in Damascus. Of course, nothing was left of this gold and shop and house. Everything was left there.
Mm-hmm. When did he have to leave?
Just before the founding of the State of Israel in 1946, in a gradual process, the whole family came. My father and his brother, younger brother, came by themselves with there was an aliyah of children that were actually rescued from Damascus, because the situation in Damascus back then was very unstable and there were riots against the Jewish community there.
Yeah. So my organization we have dealt a lot with Jews from Arab countries, because in Europe and in Norway specifically, this is a topic that is not covered by the mainstream media, and even in school there is no information about that. So maybe for our viewers, you should maybe I gather when your grandfather was born, there was around 40,000 Jews in Syria. Would that be approximately correct?
I'm not sure whether it was in Syria or in Damascus alone.
Yeah, okay. And how many are there today?
Less than 10.
Yeah, exactly.
There were two big and very with long heritage communities, one in Damascus and the other one in Aleppo, which actually had different point of views and culture. We always laugh that today, if you have two Jews that come to the bar mitzvah, one from Damascus and the other from Aleppo, they would not sit at the same table. But these communities were communities of hundreds of years, with really long heritage. I must tell you that all of that was forgotten. Those who came to Israel didn't preserve the culture, almost didn't preserve. The children were sent to kibbutz. And my father was disconnected from his family for 2 years. He actually was in the kibbutz, and my grandmother put a lot of efforts to find him and his brother. each of them in a different kibbutz. This was the policy of the Zionist movement, to integrate the children first. Most of the Jews from these communities in Syria actually left to South America or United States. We have relatives all over the world. And my grandmother, which was born in Beirut, the same. I'm not sure how many Jews were left in Beirut. I think 0 or maybe between 0 to 5. The synagogue there was just renovated after the blast in the airport. I wish I could go there and just take a look. And my grandparents are buried in the cemetery, and I've seen some photos in the cemeteries. There is a guard at the entrance, but nobody can actually get in. So
yeah, it's a really sad story. But it's good that many of you have found new hope in Israel.
Yes, I'm not sure this was the plan of my grandmother and my grandfather, but definitely this was the plan of their children. The children brought the Zionist spirit to home. And my father, for example, he had a fight with my grandmother. He insisted to come to Israel, and she had a dilemma because my grandfather came first for a business trip, and since there was war and he had a French passport and it was too dangerous to come back to Damascus, she sent the kids to warn him not to come back to Damascus, and of course they couldn't find him. So it's really an unbelievable story, but eventually the whole family was reunited here in Israel, but all the property was left in Damascus.
So they basically lost everything and they had to restart.
Yes, my grandfather died from heartbreak, broken heart, because he came from a very rich and honorable status to a simple worker, and he was pretty old. Nobody accepted him to work in the fields. And my father had to provide the family since he was 14. He left school and he provided for the 8 children.
And if we come until today, now these areas where your forefathers were expelled or pressured out from Syria and Lebanon, now these areas are used as a military base to threaten you and attack you. And how is the development of Iran building up military capacity in Syria these days?
Getting stronger every day. It's a Sisyphic battle between Israel and Iran, while Israel is developed the policy of the campaign between the wars, which means that Israel is bombing. Only in 2020, almost 500 targets were bombed by Israel in the area, not mainly in Syria, but not only in Syria, against the Iranian military deployment in the region. Military deployment, I mean missiles that can endanger the state of Israel, technologies, the components for making the missiles accurate. And specifically in South Syria, Iran also developed militias, either local militias composed of Syrians themselves that in the past were part of ISIS or part of the Free Syrian Army and today are loyal to the Iranians, or foreign militias that were brought to southern Syria, like Lebanese Hezbollah or Afghanis Fatimiyun or Zainabiyun, which are Pakistanis, and that were brought to the region. All in all, we are facing one front from the seashore through Lebanon and then to the south along the Golan Heights. I'll show you in the map that we are actually bordering Iran behind us.
So Iran's forces are all around you.
Yes, the proxies, not Iranian themselves. The Iranians would not waste Persian blood. They would use Arab blood to fight against us, or Palestinian blood to fight against us. It depends when.
So that's it's interesting that you're saying that local militias in the southern Syria, they have changed to be loyal to Iran after having fought for ISIS, or
we made a research in Alma Center. We have found 36 local militias that shifted their loyalty, and now they are affiliated with this what we call Shiite axis led by Iran.
Yeah, that's dangerous developments. When do you think this development started? Like 2 or 3 years ago, or even earlier?
I think mainly 2 years ago, after the rebels lost, because during the civil war, most of the areas in the Syrian Israeli border were taken either by ISIS or the rebels, and only the northern part, which you can see behind me over here, was taken by the government of Syria or its allies. And since the fall of 2018, the whole borderline was taken by the government and its allies, and that way it enabled the Iranians to redeploy there with a lot of, as I've said, a lot of proxies, included, by the way, Syrian army units that are loyal to Iran.
Yeah. So what is your recommendation to Israeli government, Israeli IDF Northern Command? How do they deal with these threats in a good way generally, or do you have any kind of radical other solution that you propose?
Unfortunately, and I think in this IDF and me will agree, not always you have a solution.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just management and developing answers. And part of the answers is what I've mentioned of the campaign between the wars.
Yep.
To attack the capabilities as long as it's not deteriorating to war. And each time IDF decide to strike, there is a risk. That somebody that nobody meant to will get killed, or that the Iranians will decide to take advantage of that and to deteriorate the situation, etc. Look, as a resident of the Galilee, I feel that the IDF is doing the best they can, because there is no solution to radical ideologies, except to try to educate. But this is not something that Israel itself can do. This is something that it's a more of a challenge for the international community.
Yeah.
Det finnes et falskt bilde av Israel. 2 av 10 nordmenn tror at så lenge staten Israel finnes, kan det ikke bli fred. 3 av 10 nordmenn tror at Israel behandler palestinerne like ille som jødene ble behandlet under 2. verdenskrig. MIFs nye bok forteller hvordan mediene og skolebøkene har skapt disse misoppfatningene. Boken «Det falske bildet av Israel» som et knytteneveslag mot medieverdens selvbilde, skriver journalist og forfatter Alf R. Jacobsen i forordet. Gå til miff.no og velg bøker i toppmenyen for å bestille nå. Du kan også bestille med å sende kodeord «bildet» med SMS til 2160. 398 kroner, inklusiv porto.
We are back with Sarit, and we will talk about Russia's role, because Norway is neighbor of Russia, and now Israel has even got Russia in their neighborhood. How is it going?
I think that there is a dialogue, a constructive dialogue between Israel and Russia when we speak about the reality in the region. But it's a dialogue. It's not a friendship. It's not It's not an alliance. It's just a dialogue.
Yeah.
And in this dialogue, we understand what we can and what we can't do. So we cannot achieve taking out Iran from Syria, though I believe that Russia would want that as well, because Russia would want to have the share of the hunt, meaning Syria, as bigger as possible.
Yeah.
After they help Assad. And yet they are not willing to put a lot of efforts for that cause, in a sense, to actually take Iran out. So meanwhile, we see that there is kind of a competition between Russia and Iran over this hunt over Syria. But they shared, some areas went to Russia and some areas went to Iran. And as of southern Syria, we see less and less presence of the Russians and more presence of Iranian proxies and allies. When we speak about Lebanon, it is getting more and more interesting because we see that Russia is identifying who is the key players in Lebanon and is creating connections with them. And 2 weeks ago, there was a delegation of Hezbollah that visited Moscow and was accepted with all the great honor in Moscow, as if they were the leaders of the country. So this is very interesting. And, you know, if we speak, for example, there is always the debate about the position of the Lebanese army, whether to assist it in, when I speak with Americans, they always ask me what to continue the assistance to the Lebanese army. Is it controlled already by Hezbollah? So it's not controlled by Hezbollah, but it is definitely influenced by Hezbollah. And it is definitely not going to fight Hezbollah.
Yeah.
But if we completely stop the Western dialogue with the Lebanese army, Russia will get in with full power. And I'm not sure I would want that.
No.
So the Russian involvement in the region is definitely part of a much greater conflict, which is the West and East, the United States, Russia traditional conflict, and we are part of that. Yeah.
In for many years in Norway, it was called the Middle East conflict. Was the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and I'm trying to tell everyone that there are like 70 other conflicts in the Middle East. So you cannot speak about the Middle East conflict.
This is why I founded Alma. You touched the most important issue, because exactly, people believe that the security and stability of the Middle East are all connected to Palestinian issue. But actually, when you look at what happened in the Middle East in the past decade, you understand that the troubles on the Middle East have no connection whatever to the state of Israel and to our existence and to our policy, even, not only existence. It is connected to the traditions in these societies, to the regimes in these countries, to the issues of a crisis of identity and a conflict between Muslim Shiites to Sunni Muslim Shiites to Sunni Muslims, and which it's a conflict between Sunnis and Shiites that is going on in many places around the Middle East, and it actually influenced the security of Israel, but it does not dictated by Israel itself.
Yeah.
The Palestinians are just, I'm sorry to say that, but many players are taking advantage of the Israeli-Palestinian issue to promote their own issues, and Iran is the best example for that.
Absolutely. So after the Second Lebanon War in 2006, there was international agreement and a UN resolutions that kind of guaranteed Israel that there will be no military buildup in the southern Lebanon. What happened?
So due to the Security Council resolution that ended up the war, there was supposed to be an area in South Lebanon that would be free of any illegitimate weapon. The only legitimate weapon that was allowed there was the weapon of the Lebanese army, which was deployed there for the first time ever in 2006 after the war. and the weapon of the UN. Now, I'm sorry to say that, but today the assessment are of about 40 to 50,000 rockets from various kinds. We even made, you're the first to know, first to see this map that we made. We just finished it this morning. Can I share screen? You can open it to share screen. I'll show you the nice map we made. And
I will
you can take a look of exactly which kind of Hezbollah's weapon there is in South Lebanon. Okay, there we go. So now you can see the map. This is, you can see my clicker?
Yeah.
This is South Lebanon. That's the border with Israel. And actually this area, you can see there is weaponized with short range rockets to 75 kilometers. That's quite a range in Israeli terms, because it's not, the distances here are very, very small, only tens of kilometers between Haifa to the border. And anti-tanks and anti-aircraft missiles. This area is an area, and all of this by Hezbollah. This is Hezbollah's symbol. This is the area of Hezbollah, and it was supposed to be free of any illegitimate weapon. This means when we speak about thousands of missiles of this kind that are located there, it means that if there will be war, if Hezbollah will decide to launch them towards Israel, my community will definitely get hurt. All these areas next to the borders, towns in Israel, in Acre and Carmiel and Sfat, all of these will be targeted by these rockets over here.
So do they hide
thousands of rockets?
Yeah, do they hide the rockets in civilian houses or in underground facilities or both?
Exactly, that's the whole idea. We exposed, for example, 32 sites of Hezbollah in Beirut, and we are about to expose more in South Lebanon. I'll show you an example of that for that. This is how it is being done. We found a database of launching sites. Launching sites mean that it's small open areas between the homes, and probably the rockets are stored in the homes. Of course, IDF itself probably have the information of where the rockets are exactly located. Alma Center that lies on open sources information, mainly in Arabic. We found that in Wikimedia, and we cannot point at the warehouses themselves. In most cases, we found some warehouses, but we understand that it should be probably in these buildings. And you can see that some of the buildings here are quite big, which are actually schools. And when we checked, we found out that these schools belong to Hezbollah. This is actually an educational compound of Hezbollah, so it's very easy to hide the rockets there.
And so what make you what make you think that in these specific buildings there are rockets?
We evaluate the information as reliable because of a few reasons. First, the person that uploaded this database to Wikimedia did everything he can to hide his identity using multiple IPs. Second, some of these areas were exposed before we publish it and after we publish it by Netanyahu in the UN.
Yeah.
So this, gave us stress in our understanding that it's reliable. And third, we have a lot of experience with Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And we understand how the system works. And this information was very adaptive to how the system works, to how Hezbollah is behaving, and how Hezbollah is usually hiding its ammunition in populated areas in order to make the Lebanese human shields, and in order to make sure that in times of war, Israel will have hard time to attack these areas, and if it will undermine the legitimacy of the state of Israel.
So what do you see in the coming up within this year? Do you expect that there will be any flare-ups at the borders in north?
We cannot know. We are sleeping on a barrel of explosives.
Yeah.
We don't know when it will explode. It may be next week, and it may be next year, and it may be in 10 or 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
We can point of scenarios. The first scenario that we can point of is what we call gradual escalation, a situation that Iran will retaliate, for example, for what was happening now in Natanz and the killing of Fakhrizadeh, and earlier than that, the killing of Soleimani, which are all attributed to Israel and the United States. And in the eyes of Iran, Israel is the long arm of the United States in the region.
Yep.
So if they retaliate, and then we will retaliate, and there will be like action reaction that eventually will deteriorate into an escalation. It can happen from success in their point of view of Hezbollah carrying out a terrorist attack on their border, which they have tried in the past few months a few times as a revenge for a killing of Hezbollah operative in Damascus last summer. By the way, it was not the target. The target was the ammunition warehouse, and he was killed there. If they will succeed, and then if civilians will get hurt, and again, Israel will respond, and then Hezbollah will respond, and again, it will create a gradual escalation.
Yep.
Iran may make a decision to activate its proxies on Israel's borders if it will feel that the nuclear project is under a threat, if it will want to draw the attention from any other issues, if the negotiations, I don't know, for various reasons.
Yeah.
But I must say that for now, the most probable scenario is a scenario of gradual escalation rather than Iranians given the order to carry out an attack in full scale.
Yeah.
Since we understand that there are also a lot of difficulties for the Iranians and for Hezbollah. If Hezbollah wants to take over Lebanon, it will not do that by carrying out a war against Israel. It may do that by trying to carry out days of battle against Israel. And that way, again, create the wrong impression that Hezbollah is vital for the Lebanese to protect them from Israelis, which is actually the opposite. Hezbollah is the one who endangers the Lebanese.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarit, it will be interesting to follow the developments from Israel, like always, and we are happy for this contact with the Alma Center, and hopefully you can come back and give us more briefs in the future.
I would love that, and I would love to see you soon in Israel.
Yeah, and hopefully maybe some tourist groups from Norway can contact you, and I will share the website of your institute or education center to the audience. So thanks again.
Thank you. If you can.
Hej, jeg hedder Rika og er MIFs daglige leder i Danmark. En vinterdag i 2018 besluttede jeg at trodse kulden og tog hen til en bazar arrangeret af en jødisk kvindeorganisation. Blandt standene var der et logo, som fangede min opmærksomhed. Det var MIFs smukke blå logo og budskab med Israel for fred og Davidstjernen, som minder om det israelske flag og Israel, som jeg elsker så højt. En sød MIF-frivillig spurgte, om jeg havde hørt om MIF. Det havde jeg ikke, men jeg ville gerne vide mere. Efter vores spændende samtale gik jeg hjem med en følelse af, at jeg måtte vide mere om MIF. På mif.dk og mif.no fandt jeg hurtigt ud af, at det var her, jeg hørte hjemme, sammen med alle Israel-venner, uanset deres religion, etnicitet eller politiske holdning. Jeg tog derfor kontakt til MIFs daværende frivillige daglige leder i Danmark, Dina, og spurgte, om jeg kunne hjælpe med at realisere hendes drøm om at få MIF til at blive lige så stærk en stemme for Israel i Danmark, som MIF er blevet efter 43 år i Norge. Den dag forandrede mit liv for altid. og siden har jeg koncentreret alle kræfter om arbejdet i MIF. I ordbogen beskrives ordet propaganda således: information, ofte usand eller indsidig, som udspredes for at påvirke andre til at tænke, mene, føle eller gøre noget bestemt. Resultatet efter flere årtiers propaganda i danske og internationale medier, organisationer, politikere og andre ses i dag tydeligt. En stor del af den norske og danske befolkning har fået et fejlagtigt indtryk af Israel, og nogen føler sågar had. De har været ofre for anti-israelsk propaganda, som tilsværter Israel. Propagandaen drives af kræfter, som har et klart mål om at fjerne den eneste jødiske stat i verden. MIF giver israelerne mulighed for at få ordet. MIF er en pro-israelsk stemme i et hav af Israel-hader. MIF arbejder for via langsigtet informationsarbejde at korrigere og ændre på en ensidig mediedækning, som ikke afspejler virkeligheden i Israel. Israel er det eneste demokrati i Mellemøsten. Alle religiøse minoriteter i landet er beskyttet af loven og kan sige deres mening uden at blive forfulgt. Israel er et lys i mørket, som minder os om, at sameksistens mellem religioner er mulig. Vi har et fælles ansvar for at beskytte det eneste land i verden, hvor jøder kan leve et jødisk liv uden at blive forfulgt. Tak til alle Israel-venner, som støtter vores arbejde for Israel og det jødiske folk. I giver os styrken til at fortsætte vores informationsarbejde, som får meningerne om Israel til at ændre sig. Alle Israel-venner er velkomne i MIF. Meld dig ind og vær med til at gøre en positiv forskel.